Hey there, I'm a DIY track guy. This is my humble garage, and today we finally install an Ecotec into a Miata. Hopefully. If you haven't been following the build series, here's a playlist of everything we've done so far, but we've still got a few things to do to the motor before we drop it into the car, so let's get to it. And in the meantime, please subscribe, like, and comment on this video. Much appreciated. In order to install the Miata transmission onto this motor, we first need to make some modifications to its housing to accommodate the nose of this starter. And here's the Ecotec Miata transmission adapter, and this is the cutout for the starter. If you're a keen follower of the channel, you may recognize this 6-speed Miata transmission that I cleaned up and replaced the seals on. The transmission adapter conveniently has these locating dowels. This is made from relatively soft aluminum, so to cut this, I'm going to use an oscillating tool with a Diablo bimetal blade. So that didn't work too well. Let's switch over to the angle grinder. Alright, and now that we've got this cut out, I think this is going to work just fine. Now that this is off the engine stand, we have access to the rear of the motor, and let's change out this leaky rear main seal. Alright, this is a pretty stubborn seal that won't come out with the screw method, so we're going to have to bring in this. And that's the new rear main seal. Next up, we need to install this flywheel adapter assembly. This is the side that faces the motor, and this is the automatic transmission flex plate that came stock with the Ecotec. And this is the side that faces the transmission. This is the Miata flywheel. And sandwiched in between these two, you can see the Ecotec Miata flywheel adapter. Additionally, my friend Mark has added 3 spacers along this edge of the flywheel to prevent it from flexing. Now, Ecotec Miata doesn't sell anything quite like this, but if you're considering buying the kit, you should definitely buy their billet flywheel. It's a beautiful unit and performs really well. And to bolt it up, we have these really nice ARP studs. In terms of clutch, we went with an ACT ZM1 HDSS for a 1.6 Miata. And right now, we need the pilot bearing. Next up, let's install the Ecotec Miata transmission adapter that we saw before. First, we use these 2 short bolts at the top. Next up, we use these 3 longer bolts with nuts and washers here, here, and here. And now we torque these to 40 foot-pounds. And here's our new ACT pressure plate and street performance clutch. And here's our clutch, and notice that this label shows that this is the transmission side with the springs facing out. And notice that the flywheel side's flat. Now that we're at this stage, the installation of the clutch is the same as any other Miata clutch job. Fun fact, I had to buy these pressure plate bolts brand new from Mazda for about $40 because I forgot to take the ones off of my old motor. Now I'm gradually going to torque these down to 19 foot-pounds using the skip 1, skip 1, skip 2 method, and double checking along the way that the clutch alignment tool slides through the disc into that pilot bearing freely. Here we are back at the transmission, and we want to install our new ACT release bearing. This little tube of lubricant was provided in the package, so let's apply it over here. And here we are with the transmission, made it up to the motor. All the bolts are torqued up, and it's resting on the ground now, ready to go into the Miata. Before I forget, over here at the steering rack, we need to take care of something before we drop the motor in. Included in the Ecotec Miata power steering kit is this power steering rack adapter. It goes right here. Over here by the brake booster is this hole through the firewall that used to be used for the throttle cable, which we don't need anymore because now we're using drive-by-wire. However, we do need to enlarge this hole to allow the wiring harness to pass through. Now this belongs in there. Stop. Since we removed the transmission and the PPF, we need to perform what's called a PPF alignment. So here we go, the motor is in the car, and while we were doing it, it was not possible to film exactly all the steps, but essentially it's the same as putting in a stock Miata motor with a couple of exceptions. Firstly, getting the motor to clear these sides of the frame rails here is a bit of a pain as the motor tends to move in 3 dimensions. So I had to grind back the coolant housing here a little bit just to get enough space as we're maneuvering it. But now that it's in, you can see that there's quite a bit of clearance here. But over here on the left side of the motor, there's not a lot of clearance between the frame and the oil filter housing. So I just used a die grinder to grind off a little bit of the aluminum just to provide enough clearance, and we got about half a centimeter, about 1/4 of an inch worth of clearance now. For anyone who's installed a motor in a car before, lining up the engine mounts with the mount holes is always a problem. But to get it lined up, we maneuvered the engine crane as well as a jack under the transmission and just manhandled it until the bolt holes lined up. Here's the passenger side engine mount, and same deal, except that on the subframe, this one has a slotted hole for the 2 bolts here, so it makes it a little bit easier to leverage a lever on the engine mount to get them lined up. Coming over here to the power steering and alternator bracket, in a previous episode you saw me hammer back the frame rail lip here to provide some clearance. However, the alternator plug that's on the outboard side of the alternator here snagged on this lip and broke off. So I need to replace this alternator now, but that's a job for another day. Although it would seem that the hard work is all done, we're only about halfway through. There's still a lot of wiring and fixing of a few things that we need to do, but at this point, revel with me. Big thanks to my buddy Jesse for helping me muscle this engine into the car. You've probably seen him before in the e-power steering episode as well as the removal of the 1.6 Miata motor. Thanks a lot, buddy.